and good evening, everybody, and welcome to Triangle Skeptics in the Pub, the virtual pub for November 20th, 2024. I think everybody here has already met our speaker, the inimitable Ramiro Rodriguez, who is actually the founding member of Triangle Skeptics way back in, I think, 2012 or so.
I believe so.
And is to this day a key member of the leadership team for the group. Ramiro is going to regale us with a lovely talk on the subject of biological sex. This is going up on YouTube. We're not shying away from controversy. I will give a little bit of background here. I'll try not to steal too much of Ramiro's talk, but I will say, as sort of prologue to this, there were a couple of talks at CyCon in Las Vegas that really set the stage for a talk like this one. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing Ramiro's angle on this and how he builds upon those previous talks. So without further ado, Ramiro, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I think it's a pleasure to give a talk here. And yeah, so let me share my screen over here. Okay, so yeah, like Jeff said, I think this has become somewhat of a controversial topic, and I asked Jeff. I pitched this talk to Jeff before going to CyCon, and going to CyCon, I didn't know that there were going to be talks about this subject, but yeah, so it's interesting. It's interesting that it came up. And initially, I was like, maybe I shouldn't give this talk, but I think it's good to talk about it. At least have this general discussion. So I'm gonna enter in present mode. And can everyone hear me? Okay.
I think we hear you just fine. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just find my other Zoom window so that I can see what people are looking like. Okay. All right. So yeah, we're going to talk about biological sex, seemingly controversial topic these days. But first, I'm going to start talking about just philosophy in general and the philosophy of science. So there's a quote by Richard Feynman said, "A significant part of mathematical progress comes from developing new and more efficient ways of representing concepts through symbols and notation." So here he was specifically talking about symbols and notation because he was a physicist. And as an example, in the field of physics, you might have heard of Maxwell and Maxwell's equations, Maxwell's laws of electricity and magnetism. So before this thing that some of you might know from basic physics, vectors. Before the invention of vectors, physicists would write equations like this. So they would write out an equation, and it would be some equations in 3 dimensions would have three. There would be like 3 equations because there were 3 dimensions, and so it was just very messy, very very tedious to do calculations, very tedious to think about these concepts. But then vectors were developed, so you can see that they're simpler. It's easier to think about it. These symbols represent something specific that, they're basically this representation of this thing. So nothing really changed, in the underlying physics. The only thing that changed is the way that physicists thought about these concepts. But just that change allowed physicists to be more efficient in their thinking, and probably we can't really know for sure because it would be really hard to do some analysis on that, but probably that led to some developments and some discoveries because the notation was simpler and physicists were just able to do their work faster and easier. So I'm going to start with this concept of a scientific definition. What is a scientific definition? So just reading, through different texts online, I kind of summarize what I think would be a good concept of a scientific definition. Also, I'll just read this. A scientific definition is a carefully formulated, precise explanation of a concept or phenomena based on empirical evidence and observation. It is designed to be unambiguous, allowing scientists to communicate ideas clearly and to ensure consistency across experiments, studies, and disciplines. Scientific definitions are often flexible, adapting to new findings or new theories, and they serve as foundational elements for hypothesis formulation, experimentation, and theoretical modeling in science. Right? So we start with, in science, we start with the definitions and then build theories around those definitions and build concepts, and then we can do experiments and then test that our models that we create represent reality, right? So I think that the takeaway, is that scientific definitions are unambiguous. You really have to think about this, that they should be unambiguous, they should be consistent. So you shouldn't, if you have too many exceptions, then, is that definition really useful based on empirical evidence and useful in communicating hypotheses? What I think sums it up is the definition useful, right? That's what matters. Is it useful or is it not useful? All right. So, that's just a little bit of philosophy. So now I'm going to guide us through a little bit of exploration of just biology and just empirical evidence about biology that might make us think about sort of some things, right? So we'll start very, very basic. I know some of you might already know this, but this is just some review. So in life, there's two kinds of living things. There's prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are like bacteria and archaea, and they basically, have one cell wall right here, and then all of their DNA is packed in there. So there's nothing else, like no obvious organization inside the cell of a prokaryote. Yeah. Then eukaryotes, which is us, we're eukaryotes. They're a little bit more organized. So here we have an animal cell, and you can see that there's all of these organelles which have more structure. There's more stuff going on there. But the interesting thing about eukaryotes is that there's a nucleus, and then the nucleus has the DNA in there. So in prokaryotes, the DNA is just in the cell. In eukaryotes, the DNA is inside a nucleus. Right? I think, it's pretty well established now that, eukaryotes probably evolved from prokaryotes by a prokaryote basically like swallowing another prokaryote, and these little organelles are probably prokaryotes that were swallowed by another one, and then it just became like a symbiotic relationship that has evolved through millions of years. So how do prokaryotes reproduce? So there's something called binary fission. They reproduce through a process of binary fission. Basically, the cell just begins to, the walls begin to grow, and they can either grow from the center or from the ends. But they just begin to grow. The DNA gets replicated, and then you have two copies of the same organism, the same prokaryote with identical DNA. Not entirely always identical, because there's going to be sometimes mutations, and so those mutations help with evolution. But yeah, so mostly identical, right? So yeah, so mutations are going to be copied. So that's actually a downside, right? Because if there's like before they divide right here and before they copy the DNA, there's a bad mutation that is going to cause the bacteria to do something incorrectly, or make the bacteria less fit for the environment. that bad mutation is going to be passed to the next bacteria, right? So that's not ideal. But bacteria have a mechanism to help them with that, and that's called horizontal gene transfer. So what happens in horizontal gene transfer is that you have like two bacteria, and this is just an example of one type of horizontal gene transfer. There are several types, but just at the very high level, you have two bacteria, and then one bacteria, like connects to the other bacteria, for lack of a better word, and then they give some of the DNA to the other bacteria. And so now you can see that, before this other bacteria was lacking this red DNA, and now they have that DNA. So this is the primary mechanism for spreading antibiotic resistance in bacteria. So, one bacteria develops that the gene or the DNA for antibiotic resistance, and then that resistance can be transferred to other bacteria through horizontal gene transfer. And if they're transferring this DNA, obviously that plays a huge role in evolution, because the organisms don't have to reproduce and wait for mutations to happen for some good genes to get spread across the population. They can start doing that sooner, so it'll be faster. All right. All right. By the way, if you have any questions, you can just feel free to jump in. All right, so now we're going to talk about mitosis. So this is the process by which bacteria reproduce and divide, so bacterial cells. Mitosis is the process by which eukaryotes reproduce. So eukaryotes, like we saw over here, they have the DNA in the nucleus. So we're going to simplify that in this diagram. And another thing that eukaryotes have is that eukaryotes have two copies of their genes, whereas prokaryotes only have one. I'm speaking in general, so these are all, there's probably exceptions to all of this, but in general. So eukaryotes, first, in mitosis, first you copy the DNA into two. So this gene, they're the same copy of the gene, right? So, or the chromosome. So this chromosome is homologous. We say that it's homologous to this other chromosome. They're not identical, so there's like some differences in the genetic sequence, but they code for the same things, the same proteins. So they're copied. So now you have kind of 4 copies of the DNA. 2 are identical to each other. So these 2 are identical and these 2 are identical, but between these 2, there's still some differences. Then, the cell begins to align and separate the different chromosomes into their respective place. And then you end up with 2 cells that have identical, copies of the DNA. So that's mitosis. Now, there's a process called meiosis, where you start out with your chromosomes. So in this case, we have 2 chromosomes, 2 pairs of chromosomes. So this chromosome is short and this chromosome is short. So these 2, are kind of like copies of each other. And then the long ones are copies of each other. You copy the DNA, so you have twice the DNA that you have. And then there's an important process called recombination, where like segments from one DNA sequence get transferred to another DNA sequence. So you see that this little thing right here from this red thing got switched with this red thing over here in this other gene. So that happens, and then that happened between here, this step and this step, into creating the 2 cells, right? So now this cell divides further, and it just puts into each cell only 1 copy of the DNA. So, you start with one cell with two sets of chromosomes, and then you end up with 4 cells that have only one set of chromosomes. So that's what meiosis is. And just to remind ourselves, you might have seen this in like high school biology, but I think it's good to go over it. So now, the process of fertilization. So that's the process of meiosis, where you end up with 4 of these cells, and we call these gametes, the ones that only have one set of chromosomes. And then if you take another gamete from another organism that also only has one set of chromosomes, and then you fuse them, you're going to get another organism that has 2 sets of chromosomes, right? And so this fusion is what we call sexual reproduction, right? So just some interesting facts about sexual reproduction. So it is estimated that sexual reproduction evolved around 2 to 1.1 billion years ago. So that's really interesting because it looks like it took about 1 to 2 billion years to evolve. It seems like life on planet Earth appeared pretty quickly after the Earth was created, but it took a really long time for sex to develop, sexual reproduction to develop. Yeah, so it's believed, so let me talk about this point. It's believed that meiosis was present in the last eukaryote common ancestor. So it's believed that sexual reproduction evolved only once in the history of the Earth. And we often talk about convergent evolution, where different organisms see different problems, and then they end up solving them in very similar ways. And so in those cases, a solution to those problems can evolve multiple times. So whenever something only evolves once, it's probably pretty difficult for it to happen. A lot of things probably have to happen in the right way, and very rare things happen in the right way. And I think it's obvious, why it would be complicated. Like, we saw what was required. You need diploidy, so you need like 2 sets of chromosomes. You need meiosis, and then you need fertilization or karyogamy, which is the fusion of chromosomes, of two cells with chromosomes. So it is believed that the process only arose in eukaryotes, and that there are some proteins in meiosis that are similar to proteins in bacteria. Let me spell bacteria there. There's some proteins in bacteria that are used for this horizontal gene transfer that are similar to meiosis. So some scientists think that probably this horizontal gene transfer evolved and eventually developed into sexual reproduction. How? It's, I don't know, very complicated. I don't think that scientists really understand that right now. All right, so now we talked about these gametes right here. So now we're going to focus a little bit more on these gametes. So there's different types of gametes. There's some gametes that are the same shape, and they look identical in some species. So those gametes, we call the isogamy, when a species uses gametes that look identical. In other species, there's gametes that are where one gamete maybe is different than the other one, and maybe one is slightly larger than the other one. That's called anisogamy. I'm probably going to be mispronouncing some of these words, so please forgive me about that. And then, in anisogamy, you can have, let's go back to isogamy. So in isogamy, you can have both of your gametes can be moving, so that, they can have like a flagella, so that they can move and find another gamete. In anisogamy, it just means that the 2 gametes are different. But both of them could be moving. So in some, you have some species where the larger gamete is still able to move, and the smaller gamete is also able to move. And then you have oogamy, where one gamete cannot move, it's immotile, and then the other gamete, the smaller one, can move in its modal. And then you have other weird things where you have these. So in fungi, a lot of fungi, their adult form actually only has one set of chromosomes, and then they have another stage where they have both sets of chromosomes. So it's a little weird, right? Because in us, we always have two sets of chromosomes. Like every human you meet is going to have two sets of chromosomes, but that's not always the case. I would go into too much of these other types of gametes, but the basic ones are isogamy, anisogamy, and oogamy, right? So we're going to focus more on isogamy. Like what happens when the gametes are the same size, right? So typically, the species have two types of gametes. So again, think about it as like these are the same size of gametes. So typically, you have two types of gametes, but that's not always the case. So there's species that have more than two types of gametes, and how do they manifest? Like, what makes them different, right? So the ability to come together, they have the gametes have proteins on their outside, and then they're essentially, those proteins tell them like, oh, that's a gamete that I can fuse with. So let's start fusing. And so these proteins tell one gamete that they can fuse with that other gamete, right? So so the types of gametes are, sort of like these proteins on the outside of the gametes, and then that's what makes them different, right? So there's this species of amoeba that has an interesting life cycle. You have two gametes, and then they fuse. These are single cell organisms. They fuse. They create this zygote. There's other gametes that start attaching themselves to this one, and then the zygote starts eating them, and then eventually they break off and give a whole bunch of other offspring, right? That's not that's interesting and weird, but the weird thing is that they have three types of gametes. So here's an article from NIH, and so with these three types of gametes, the gamete, they call them gamete type 1, 2, and 3. So gametes of type 1 cannot fuse with gametes of the same type. So type 1 and type 2 can fuse. Type 1 and type 3 can fuse, but type 1 and type 1 cannot fuse. So there's three different possible combinations of zygotes, right? In humans, there's really only one combination of zygote, like, because we only have two types of gametes. A question? Oh, okay. All right, so that's the amoeba. So the three possible zygote types are 1, 2, 2, 3, and 1, 3. Right? All right, so are there any other interesting cases like this? So yes, there's a fungus. It's called Schizophyllum commune, I think. And so the gametes, like what codes, I think the proteins on the outside of the gamete are coded by proteins in two different regions of their genes. And then there's two types of that, and each region, in the region A, there's 9 alleles for type A and 32 for type B. The other region B has 9 for both A and B. So if you do the combinatorics, all the possible combinations, there's 23,328 possible combinations. So this fungus has, you can say that they have 23,328 types of gametes, and that each of them, like if you take one of those gametes, that gamete can mate with 22,960 other types of gametes, but it cannot mate with itself or other types of gametes that are similar to it. Right? And so this article from Discover magazine says why this fungus has over 20,000 sexes. Right? If we take and like sort of a definition that the number of gametes is the number of sexes that the species has. In biology, they don't really use that terminology. They use, if you have two types of gametes, they say that there's two sexes, but if you have more than two types of gametes, they call the kinds of gametes or types of gametes. But they're different gametes. So, yeah. All right, so that's the case when the gametes are similar to each other in size. So now, what happens when the gametes, like one is much larger than the other one. So there's only two types of gametes. One is large and the other one is small and can move. So now we're going to explore, like how life progressed, right? So just before I go on, so yeah, it is believed that, initially life, when gametes develop and sexual reproduction develop, it started out as isogamy. So all life was probably isogamous. And then eventually, oogamy evolved, where you have the different sizes in sperm and ovum, or different sizes in gametes, which we call sperm and ovum. Okay. So let's look at some of those species that are, that have oogamy. So we'll start with some hermaphrodites. So hermaphrodites are organisms that produce both types of gametes in the same organism. So here are just some examples. So this is a sea worm, and these white regions right here, there's their penis, and that's where they eject the small gametes, the sperm, and so they're fighting right now to see who can, I guess, give the other one more sperm or something. This plant right here is this is a flower, and this flower, in the same flower, that flower produces both large gametes and small gametes. And then these earthworms are hermaphrodites. The same organism produces both sperm and ovum, and these are snails as well. So in all of these species, every organism produces sperm and ovum. So just how common is this? So there's 65,000 animal species which are hermaphrodites that we know about right now, approximately that. So that's about 5% of all animal species. But with the caveat that if you exclude insects, it's about 33% of all animals are hermaphrodites. Insects, really like to be non-hermaphrodites. There are some hermaphrodite insects, but it's very, very rare. Probably, a lot of that comes from beetles. Like the majority of insects are beetles. So, and for some reason, probably beetles became non-hermaphroditic, and so that's where that's probably coming from. And then 94% of all flowering plants are either hermaphroditic or monoecious. We'll talk about what monoecious means, but monoecious also just means that the same organism can produce both sperm and ovum. Okay, so let's see. All right, so that's hermaphrodites. So what about what one thing could happen is that even though organisms are, like, the species is hermaphroditic, there could always be genetic mutations, this and that, or even they could have an accident. So each organism might, in fact, like, there could be organisms that only produce sperm or only produce ovum, right? For whatever reason, either an error in the genetic code or not. But as a species, they produce both.
When you say organisms there, you mean individuals?
Individuals, yeah.
Okay.
Individuals. All right, so now we're going to go to talk about sexual systems. So this is really interesting, I think, because so these are the different types of sexual systems. There's a lot of them. And so what is a sexual system? So I guess one way of explaining it is, like here we have hermaphrodites. Let's go with a just basic example of this sexual system and draw a DSC. So in this species that have this type of sexual system, their specific organisms, the individuals in the species, are either males or they're hermaphrodites. And so what do we mean by that? So if they're hermaphrodites, that means that they're producing both sperm and ovum, small gametes and large gametes. If they're male, we say that they're producing small gametes. So in this species, you look at the organisms, and you're gonna find two types of organisms: one that produce small gametes and one that produce both. And then you're not gonna find organisms that only produce large gametes. And barnacles are an example of that. Some species of barnacles, and actually, Charles Darwin was able to notice that. He's like, oh, that's interesting. It seems like I'm only finding males here and hermaphrodites. I'm not finding any females. So yeah, but there's other combinations. So for example, and here you have two types of organisms, males and hermaphrodites. In other species, you could have females and hermaphrodites, or in some species, you could have females, males, and hermaphrodites, right? So you could have all three in the same species. And I forget which one of these is that one. Yeah, so for us, we use the no-chorism sexual system, where there's individuals are either male or female. So individuals either produce sperm or produce ovum. And then there's other ones like that. So in plants, like we only have one copy of organs that produce sperm or ovum. But plants in the same organism, you can have many copies of those organs that produce sperm and ovum, right? So yeah, so you can imagine a plant. Before over here we saw that this plant produces both sperm and ovum, but in some species of plants, a flower can produce. So we call that a perfect flower if it can produce both types of gametes. But and if a flower only produces small gametes, we call it a male flower. And if a flower produces only large gametes, we call it a female flower. All right. So, but now you can have all the combinations that you can think about are probably out there in nature. So let's just go through some of these examples. So you can have individual plants that have in the same plant, there's male flowers and perfect flowers, so that produce both. You can have individual plants that produce female flowers and perfect flowers, or species where the individual organisms produce male, female, and perfect flowers. Right? Those are the possible combinations. Or you can have also species where the same organism only produces male flowers and another produces all female flowers. Another interesting combination is where you have basically like one individual organism produces all male flowers. So all of the flowers of that plant are female. But there are other members of the same species that produce hermaphroditic flowers or perfect flowers. You can have this, the opposite, where there's male. I'm going to start referring to the individuals as males. So male plants and hermaphroditic plants. You can have in the same species male individuals, female individuals, and hermaphroditic individuals. And then even in some trees, you have it where when they're young, the young in the species, they either only produce male or only produce female. But as they mature and they age and they get older, they start producing both types of gametes in the same organism. Some scientists think that is probably evolved to avoid self-pollinating and when they're younger. But there's probably a lot of research that needs to go into studying a lot of that. Right, so that's plants. They're weird. I think we're pretty boring with the way we reproduce. But all right, so now let's go to animals. With animals, there's some examples where there's something called sequential hermaphrodites. So there's three examples. There's protandry. So this is where organisms develop as male. So they're born and then they develop all the organs and anatomy to produce small gametes. Like everyone goes through that stage. Everyone that's born in that species goes through that stage. And then later on in life, they switch to females. They start producing large gametes. And there's hormones that go through that, and then like their internal organs, there could be let's say reconstructed, but they change. It's part of their biology, right? It's normal for them to undergo that process. There's also protogeny, which is the opposite. So everyone is born a female, and then they later in life they develop into a male. And then there's also bidirectional, where they're born either male or female, but depending on the circumstances, they can change back and forth. They might not be able to find a female mate. They might just be finding males, so they might change into the sex that they need to. So these are some examples of fishes. This is found in a lot of fish. So like for example, clownfish is an example of protandry, where everyone is born female and everyone is born male, and then you turn female. I think probably you're aware of. I think there's a movie called Finding Private Ryan. I think it was, where you find like they were looking for I guess one of these types of fish.
Finding Nemo.
Oh, Finding Nemo. Yeah. And then there's this other fish, which is a parrotfish. And so these parrotfish, they're all born as female, and then there's a dominant male among all the other females, and eventually that dominant male dies, or something happens to it, and then there's like a dominant female, and then that turns into a male. All right. So yeah, so we're starting to get sort of in like what triggers an individual organism to produce small gametes or large gametes, right? So in these fish, what triggers that is like, are there females around, or is there a female around? So like in clownfish, is there a female around? No, no. Okay, so I'm going to start producing small gametes. Or yes, there is. Okay, so I'm going to produce large gametes, right? So that's called sex determination, right? Like, and so there's different sex determination systems. So, for example, in there's environmental sex determination systems. So, for example, in Titurus, this is a reptile. Temperature is what determines whether the individual produces large gametes or small gametes. So if it's less than 69% when they're developing in their eggs, if the temperature is less than 69.9 Fahrenheit, they develop into females, producing small gametes. If it's greater, they develop into males, producing small gametes. And then there's this organism. This is a type of sea worm, Bonilla viridis, which the larvae are just swimming around, and their sex is not determined yet. But if the larva lands on a female, then they start producing small gametes, so they become male. And if they just land on the floor, then they become female. So there's some chemicals that the females are sort of giving off, and the larvae detect those chemicals, and that's how they decide whether to be female or male. So this is like the environment sort of determines, right, what gametes to produce. So what gametes should I produce? And the organism sees what the environment is like, and then okay, I'm going to start producing those types of gametes. All right, so now there's also here we're getting more higher up in the tree of life, right? Narrowing down into or region of the tree of life. Now we start going with chromosomes, right? So sex determination in chromosomes. By the way, I kind of didn't do the transition well, but you can see that there's kind of like a graduation, right? Like in scientists think that initially, hermaphrodites were how all species reproduce, and then later on, these types of specializations started to evolve. So chromosome determination, right? So there's species where the chromosomes are what determines what gametes the specific individual is going to make. So there's a few systems. There's XY systems, which we are familiar with. So in this system, the male gametes are determined what the sex is. So like if the sperm is X, then the offspring is going to be a female. If the sperm is Y, has a Y chromosome, then the offspring is going to be a male. In birds, so there's another type of system where female gametes determine the sex. So this typically occurs in birds. So in birds, males are ZZ, and then females can be either, males are ZZ, and then females are ZW, and then females either produce Z gametes or W gametes. And so depending on which type of gamete gets fertilized, that's going to be the sex of the offspring. And then there's another system where it's X0. So if there's two X's, then that organism develops into a female. And if there's only one X, that organism develops into a male. And then there's haploidy. We'll talk about haploidy in a little bit. That's found in bees. And there's polygenic, where multiple chromosomes are involved in sex determination. So here, only one chromosome is involved in determining the sex of the individual. In polygenic systems, multiple chromosomes are there. So, mice is an example of XY system. ZW for birds, for grasshoppers and a lot of insects is X0. And then bees. Bees are interesting. So let's go talk about bees. So in bees, there's no sex chromosome. What determines the sex is whether you have one set of chromosomes or two sets of chromosomes. So, so in humans, both males and females have both sets of chromosomes. But in bees, only the females have two sets of chromosomes, and then the males only have one set. So the females, when they develop their meiosis, the eggs, the eggs are only have one set of chromosomes, and the drones they don't even use meiosis because they only have one set of chromosomes. So there's no need for meiosis. In the males, they just do mitosis to develop the sperm, and it's just one set of chromosomes. So all of their sperm are identical, like all of their sperm are clones of each other. So that's not the case, in humans. So that's interesting. So then they fertilize the eggs, and if they fertilize the eggs, then the eggs are going to become female, and the eggs that are left unfertilized, they're going to become males. Cool. All right. So now that's haploidy. So no chromosomes. Strictly for sex is just the amount of whether or not you have two copies of the system. All right. So these two charts kind of give us a little summary of the different sex determination systems. So like in humans, we have 44 chromosomes, and for females, 44 chromosomes, and then you can have two X. Males, 44 chromosomes, and then X and a Y. Birds, 76 chromosomes. I think, yeah, this is chickens. Chickens, 76 chromosomes. plus 2 sex chromosomes. I think this is a fruit fly, 6 chromosomes plus 2 sex chromosomes for females, or for males, it can be either 6 chromosomes and 1 sex chromosomes, the X, or it could be an XY, both developing to males. Grasshoppers, females have XX, males just have X. So females have 24 chromosomes, males have 23 chromosomes.
Where did you
And
get
then,
the chart?
what is it?
Where did you get the chart? Because there's an error.
In here?
Yes.
Which one?
Humans have 46.
No, 44 non-sex chromosomes
Okay.
plus the 2 sex chromosomes.
Thank you.
Yep. So then, yeah, so, grasshoppers, birds, we kind of go over that. And then bees, so the females have 32 chromosomes. They're diploid. They have 2 sets of chromosomes. And then the males only have 16 sets of chromosomes, and that's what makes them male. There's no like X or Y chromosome, right? It's just the number of chromosomes that they have. All right, and then I was going to talk about this weird one, polygenic. So as if the platypus was not weird enough already, the platypus actually doesn't just have an XY, they don't just have X and Y. They have 5 sex chromosomes. So, in order to determine what is male and female, they have to have match 5 of these chromosomes. So females have X1, X1, X2, X2, X3, X3, blah, blah, blah. And then males have all the X's plus all the Y's. And so they, it must be really weird for their cells when they're trying to arrange all of these into their sperm to make sure that all the Y's go with one sperm and all the X's go with the other sperm. Pretty weird.
Saying to speculate on what kind of evolutionary pressure led to that.
Exactly. Yeah, like that's just crazy. But they're not the winner in this kind of weird stuff. There's a frog called the smoky jungle frog that they they have 12 sex chromosomes out of their 22. So they have a total of 22 chromosomes, and 12 of those are sex chromosomes. Whereas in humans, it's only 2 of our chromosomes are sex chromosomes. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so so one more weird thing about platypus. All right, so now an interesting thing is like the sex determination system can, there's X, Y, and then there's ZW, but species can actually change from one system to the other through evolution. So this is an example of Rana rugosa. It's a frog from Japan. And they've done studies where different species of the frog are using the XY system. So like this region of Japan, frogs in this region of Japan are using the XY system, and then frogs in this other region of Japan are using the ZW system. And then there's a region where it's somewhat ambiguous, somewhere in between, where they're maybe sort of using both in the same species. And so I think scientists think that species can start as XY and then become ZW and then go back to XY, and so forth. Yeah. So it's not set in stone. So I'll go back here. Yeah, so this sex determination through chromosomes is, it can be pretty complicated, and there's a lot of different combinations, and probably a lot of these combinations exist somewhere out there in nature. Just whatever fits the particular species, and they're just trying to survive. The only goal is to reproduce and continue on. However you do it is allowed. So now, those are sex determination systems. So it's very interesting. I don't know if there's any questions on that. I'm going to go on to assume now that we're just dealing with simple sex determination system. So we're just going to deal with like X, Y, or ZW. So in those cases, I want to go over a really weird case of a species. So this is called a rough. So I'm talking this concept in biology is called morphs. So in this species of bird, there's one type of female here, and then there's 3 types of males. So you just because I'm using interchangeably the language of male and female, with males are the ones that produce small gametes, females are the ones that produce large gametes. So let's just review some of that. So there's one type of organism that produces large gametes, but then there's 3 types of organisms that produce small gametes. Independent, feeder, and satellite. So let's talk about those organisms, those 3 types of males. So 84% of males in the population are independent. They call them the independent type, and they're territorial. So these types of birds, they group together in like a little colony of sorts. But then each one of the males, the independent males, kind of creates like a little space for themselves that's their territory in the colony. And they attract, they have all these feathers to attract the females. And the females, are probably picking and choosing which nest they like best. And that, they're territorial because they're competing with the other males that are also independent. Then there's the satellites. So 16% of the male population is satellites, and they're these other birds that they look totally different than independents. They're different coloring. They're white. They have white plumage. They're not as big, and they're not territorial. They're just kind of walking around, and if one of these independent males gets angry, hey, you're getting too close to my nest. They're okay. I'll leave now. And so that's the satellites. And so, but they're walking around, because the independents tolerate them, because it's found that the females are sort of attracted to regions where there's more of these satellite birds. And then, the reproductive strategy is that when the like 2 independents might be fighting, for their territory, and there's a female around, the satellite just like comes in, and then it's like, okay, they're distracted. Well, they're distracted fighting each other. I'm going to go for the female. So that's their reproduction strategy. And then there's the feeders, which is only 1% of the males. They're not territorial either, and they look very similar to females. So this is a better picture. You can see that this is a feeder, and this is a female. So they look very similar. So I guess the reproductive strategy is just to look almost like a female. And they were discovered very recently, these feeder types, only in 2006. And these are European birds, so it's interesting. So let's look at what happened there, like the genetics of that. So about 3.8 million years ago, there was a big section of chromosome 11 that was inserted in the reverse, creating the feeder allele. So initially there were only the females and the independent birds, the independent birds, and then there was bad copying somewhere, and a long sequence of DNA was just inserted in the same chromosome backwards. So the genes are going the other way, and that created this feeder type, the one that looks like a female. And that they continue for a long time, 3.8 million years ago. So a few million years they continue along that. Then it is believed that about 500,000 years ago, these two there was some recombination event. Recombination is really rare when two chromosome regions become very different. But under like really rare circumstances, they were able to recombine, and then what happened is that this sequence of DNA, some genes are going the right way and some genes are going the wrong way, and that's what created the feeder, what do you call it, the satellite allele. So this this is really weird, right? That we don't have really an equivalent of this concept in humans. It's very alien to us because, like all of us are either female, like, and all the males, there's the stereotype of males. We only have one stereotype of male, and we have one stereotype of female. But in these species, there sort of would be like there would be like three stereotypes of males, and the genetics, are distinct, and they're reproducing. In fact, I guess the satellites, they're growing. They've grown to 16% of the males in 500,000 years. So this is the concept of morphs, and there's a lot of species. Well, I don't know if there's a lot comparatively, but there's species where you find morphs in the species. So the males, there could be like two or more different types of males, or vice versa. There could be two or more different types of females. In this example, is just the males are different, but it can happen with females as well. All right. Yeah. So that's that's an interesting case. So if we have here, if we think about it, there's the organisms that produce small gametes right here, and then there's the organisms that produce large gametes, right? All right. So yeah, now we're gonna go and talk about just humans. So we humans are not very interesting in terms of the sex, but I think we're very, very boring. But there's some interesting cases that happen during development. So let's take a look at some of those examples. So these are called intersex conditions. So this woman, she has something called complete androgen insensitivity. So her DNA, she has XY chromosomes, but there's a genetic mutation that causes all of her cells to be insensitive to androgen or testosterone, right? So they're developing, and because they have all the other, you have the XY chromosome, they're developing along male path. But then it sort of stops around 7 weeks of gestation, and then like sort of start developing as female, right? And so individuals that have this condition, they're born like anatomically, externally, they're female. They have what looks like a vagina, but they have testes inside that are undeveloped. And these individuals are born. There's been a few cases where they're born. The doctor says, "Oh, they're a female, they're a girl," and then they grow up. They grow up thinking that they're a female. But then, when puberty hits, they're not getting their period, right? So then I think that's when they probably go to the doctor, and the doctor starts to analyze what's going on, and then they can do genetic testing. And it's gonna be imagine that you're a little girl, you spend your whole life thinking that you're a female. You go to the doctor, and they're like, "Okay, you have XY chromosomes. You have the genes of a male." Can be pretty weird. So there's an interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Ramiro, do these people have undeveloped testes instead of ovaries?
Yeah. So this particular condition, they don't have ovaries; they just have undeveloped testes. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, and you can. There's an interesting. I think I don't. I think it's a TED Talk where you can see her, talk about her experiences going through this process, and just like realizing what, because it's a little girl, she's thinking like, I'm gonna get married one day, have kids, have a family, and all of a sudden you're told that, yeah, that's not gonna happen. Not only that, because there's people that are infertile. Not only that, like you have XY chromosomes. So if somebody ever picks up their DNA, they're like, okay, this is a guy, so we need to be looking for male. All right, so then there's another condition. This is called 46XX, 46XY. So I don't know if anyone here is familiar with chimerism, but you know that there's if you let's say that you have two zygotes, so two fraternal twins, they usually develop into two different people, two different babies, and then they're born. But there are these cases where the zygotes sort of merge very, very early in development, and then they just develop into one organism, like one person. And the people that are born like this, they have no idea, that they're like every cell in their body is a different person. Like genetically, they're a different person, every cell in their body. That a lot of times that happens where the two are the same sex. So two zygotes at the beginning are the same sex, and then they merge. But some cases develop where the two zygotes are different genetics. One is XX and one is XY. They merge, and then one organism develops. These people develop phenotypically male or phenotypically female. And a lot of them may not even know it, right? So you can think about it this way: like if the XY cells are like all concentrated in parts of your body that don't have anything to do with sexual reproduction or hormone production or that kind of stuff, then you're going to develop, like fully into whatever sex the other cells in the body are. So you can develop into a female or into a male. But there are cases where it's sort of ambiguous. If the two cells are sort of mixed together in regions of the body that are sexual regions, right? And so it can be ambiguous, and they can develop characteristics of both sexes. Yeah, so this is an example of individual with this condition. You can see that their breast tissue is more developed, but you can kind of see that they also have a beard, and some of their characteristics are male. And sometimes these patches indicate that form of chimerism. Yep. So that's another intersex condition. So another possible intersex condition is the XX male syndrome. So in XX male syndrome, you have an individual that has two X chromosomes, but somehow a gene called the SR gene that's typically in the Y chromosome, and this SR gene is what starts the process of becoming male. This SRY gene somehow gets tagged on to the X chromosome. So you have an individual with two X chromosomes, but SRY gene is right there in one of the X's. So these people typically develop a phenotypically male. So this is an individual that has that condition, and there's some variability in the traits. So this individual, they have a penis. They're infertile, because there's genes in the Y chromosome for sperm development, right? And in these cases, only the SRY gene came over to the X, not all of those other genes. So they can produce sperm, but they look like a male, right? But they're XX, right? Okay, so I think those are some examples of intersex conditions, just 3 examples. There's other examples, but in a lot of these examples, what we're seeing that characteristics of one sex, or characteristics from both sexes, what we would attribute as, okay, this is a male characteristic or this is a female characteristic. They're both present in the same individual, the same person, right? And that's what sort of what intersex is. All right, so now just a little bit of history about intersex. So in ancient Greece, they were having this debate back in ancient Greece. So Galen, he was a physician in ancient Greece. He viewed sex as a spectrum, and he wrote about that hermaphrodites, he called them, are like perfect because they embody both sexes in the same person. And then Aristotle viewed intersex. They didn't call it intersex; they called it hermaphrodites. He viewed that as sort of. He said that these are cases where there's superfluous genitalia. So he viewed it more like a mistake. So even back then in ancient Greece, they were having this debate about this sex, whether sex is a spectrum or it's not. In ancient Rome, okay, so these are all examples in history where we see people in society trying to deal with hermaphrodites, right? Not hermaphrodites, intersex people. But it's because they called them hermaphrodites back then. So in ancient Rome, ancient Romans recognized that they were female, male, and hermaphrodites. They call them hermaphrodites. And by Roman law, like everyone had to be classified as male or female. So there's law written that says how to go about classify people as either male or female. In the Middle Ages, in the 12th century, this treatise on this is, I think, is like a law treatise, some nation. They stated whether an hermaphrodite may witness a testament depends on which sales prevails. I don't understand exactly what that. I'm guessing that is whether they can testify in court or something like that. That's not necessarily important. I think what's important, is that first they were aware of intersex conditions, and then we're seeing how they're dealing with the fact that they're intersex people, right? So in this case, they go there's more written about this, but basically, which sex prevails meant what do they look more like? Do they look more like, and what do they act like more? Do they act more like a male or do they act more like a female? And that's how we're going to treat them as male or female. Peter Cantor, he was a French Roman Catholic theologian, and when he was writing about sodomy in his book, De Vito Sodomotico, I didn't know that there was a book about that, but he wrote that, the church allows the hermaphrodite to use the organ by which she or he is most aroused, but should she or he fail with one organ, the use of the other can be permitted or can never be permitted, and she or he must remain perpetually celibate to avoid any similarity to the role inversion of sodomy, which is detested by God. So, I guess, if there was some ambiguity, they would tell this person, well, pick which organ you're most aroused by, but if you can't have kids, you can't try the other organ, because that's very close to sodomy. So, interesting. Yeah, so, for a long time, intersex conditions were called hermaphrodites. So, and then there were what they call true hermaphrodites in humans. True hermaphrodites were people that had both testes tissue and tissue to produce ovum, and the pseudo hermaphrodites were people that only have one. Maybe their external genitalia were different. But now the term hermaphrodite is not used. Some people think that it's derogatory, and the term intersex is what is used to describe these characteristics. Before I go there, I didn't add a slide to this, but I was thinking how common is these intersex conditions. So the answer to that really depends on what you define as intersex. How you define intersex, right? So if you use a big definition, an expansive definition of intersex, so you include a lot of conditions. Some people estimate that it could be as high as 2% of the population has some form of intersex condition, and it can be as low as 0.2% of the population has some form of intersex condition. But even if it's 0.2%, just here in the triangle, there's probably a lot of people. There's probably more people that have intersex conditions in the triangle than people that come to our Skeptics meetup. So, we're you can make that what you
Sex
will.
conditions are about as common as being a redhead.
Yeah, if you take the 2% figure, yeah, they would be as common as being a redhead. Yeah. All right, so then there's the big debate. So the big debate that has been going on in the skeptics community is should the question is, should every individual is every individual either male or female? So this is exclusive. So should we categorize every individual as male or as female? So this is back the confirmation of Ketanji Brown Jackson, the Supreme Court Justice, where in the congressional hearing, she was asked by this Congresswoman the question, "What is a woman?" And she said her answer was, "I'll leave that to the biologists to decide." And by a lot of the pundits, this was seen as what an outrage. How can she not know what a woman is? It's very simple to know what a woman is. This is just insane. This is the crazy left. Look at how crazy the left has become. And then recently, our esteemed biologist Richard Dawkins said, as a biologist, there are two sexes, and that is all there is to it. When he went on Piers Morgan. So there's, and this was a slide from the talk that was given at citing, and this is the definition. So this is the side that of the debate that says that sex is strictly binary. So the definition of biological sex is that an individual's sex is defined by the type of gamete its reproductive anatomy is organized to produce. In other words, like, how do we know which particular individual is male or female? We need to look at the type of gamete that individual is going to produce or should have produced if they had developed normally, right? And that's what the debate is. Other view is not as simple as that, and especially I guess with intersex conditions. These people have sort of characteristics of both sexes. So should we really just look at the gametes and say, all right, no, it doesn't matter, anything else in this person's body, let's just ignore it. We're only going to look at what types of gametes they were going to produce, right? And so, so that's the debate. Just want to present, what the debate is. So, let's go back, to the beginning when we were talking about philosophy. Remember, like, the definition of a scientific definition. What should a scientific definition be? So, because what we're debating, we're not debating on the evidence or the observations, right? We're debating on what a definition should be. So, the takeaways, what should a definition be? Unambiguous, consistent, it should be based on empirical evidence. I think, and this is my opinion, right? So I feel like, with everything that we've seen, if we limit ourselves to this specific definition of sex, you can see that we're going to have to make exceptions for like large areas of biology, like large areas of animal species and just species of protists and plants in general, right? Because when we look at this definition, if we look at one of those trees that have male individuals and hermaphrodite individuals and male and female individuals in the same species, like, okay, how do we classify the individuals that produce both types? And it starts to become tricky. But I think that the key takeaway should be, is the definition useful? And in some areas, assuming that there are two sexes and that every individual is either male or female, in some areas of studies, that definition is going to be useful, depending on what how you're studying things and what are your assumptions that you're making in that field of study. But in other fields of study, it might make more sense to not be as strict, with that definition, to not be strictly binary. So I think that's the takeaway. Because this is, in my opinion, this is what we're debating. There are two biological sexes. male and female, and then every individual should be classified as male or female. That's, I think that's what one side is arguing. I'll leave that up to you. Yeah. So let me see. And this debate is also going on in biology, the field of biology itself. Here, I just put some articles. This article is from a journal, scientific journal, multivariate models of animal sex, breaking binaries leads to better understanding of ecology and evolution. So if when studying animal species that are not strictly binary in the types of gametes that they're producing, like the individual members of the species are not strictly producing one or the other types of gametes, that might lead to a better understanding of evolution and yeah, just science in general. This paper, the inclusions of sex and gender beyond the binary in toxicology. If intersex individuals make up like 2% of the population, and when drugs are being developed, we should probably look, at how drugs are going to affect people that might have different combinations of hormones in their body that are not the normal male female hormones. So when science is when articles are being reported, and the only thing that we need to know is whether they're male or female, is that really telling us the whole story in a scientific study? And then, Scientific America, there's an article that says sex redefine the idea of two sexes. It's simplistic. Biology is nothing, that there's a wider spectrum than that. And I think, what they're referring again, in this article, is they're again talking about all of the other, they're not just narrowing this debate to humans, but they're talking about all the other species of animals and just life in general, right? That should we think about all of life as there just being two sexes, right? And it depends, right, what we mean by sex. And in this talk, sometimes I use sex to refer to fertilization, that was sexual reproduction. Sometimes I use sex to refer to the type of gamete. So sometimes I use the large gamete, I refer to as the female. The small gamete I refer to as the male. Sometimes I use sex to refer to the individual itself, right? So I think we just have to think about the words and the definitions. But yeah, I think that's it. So I'll open it up as to any questions or comments.
That was a lot, and it was really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask sort of a meta question. What led you to propose this talk, and how long did you spend assembling it? The answer may be complicated, I recognize.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Richard Dawkins talked a few years ago. Richard Dawkins wrote an article that talked specifically about sex, about biological sex, and so it's like I really want to understand what he's saying with that. And so that's when I started reading a lot about the biology of this, and I just wanted to know, is that really the case? What he's saying, is what he's saying makes sense? In that article, he said that what determines sex is the chromosomes. So like if you're XX, you're female. If you're XY, you're male. But I hadn't read about some of these intersex conditions where you can be XY, but like outside you look like a female. Like you didn't like people don't even know that they're female. Yeah, so I think just reading about this topic over multiple years, I started trying to dissect it and trying to understand it better. Yeah.
So difficult to quantify the time spent, I guess.
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
We could just say that we've been discussing this ever since we came back to SciCon.
Mm.
We've
Because
been talking about it even before Cycon. Yeah.
it's been a hot button topic in the skeptics community, and I think in any community right now is,
Yeah.
what do we do with this? And
It seems to me that the sort of political issue now has to do with trans people. And it seems to be a somewhat different issue than, biologically, you could say, okay, there's a bunch of people who are clearly female, a bunch of people who are clearly male, and then there's a number, maybe up to 2%, where they really have some characteristics of both. And it seems to me scientifically that isn't terribly controversial. People could decide it's better to define it this way or better to define it that way. But then there's a person who might be clearly male and says, I'm a female in a male body. And it seems to me that the question here now is they claim that essentially they say their psychology is female, not their biology. And at least that's my impression of what a lot of trans people and vice versa, of course. And
Yeah.
that seems troublesome to me because
if
So
I think this seems
I'd
to be
like
a
to interject
biological
with
issue, not a psychological
I would
issue.
like to interject with that, because
Sure.
this is Ramiro and I have discussed this like ad nauseum about, and I think the big issue here is what definition of sex are we using? When you say biological, are we talking chromosomes? Are we talking gametes? Are we talking secondary sexual characteristics? So like, what makes me female? Is it because I have a functioning uterus? I have functioning ovaries, and I have breasts, and I produce the correct amount of estrogen and progesterone to cause my body to go through puberty and to reproduce. Now, there may be people that have 95% of the same things I have, but they have an increased testosterone level for whatever reason. Should they be allowed to compete with me while we train at a marathon race? Because that's the question. This is the stuff that people are asking, is really what the definition is, because there's a condition you kind of touched on a little bit, Ramiro, where people have 46 XY and then that extra XX, or vice versa. I can't remember which one it is. Those people come out like I looked up the Wikipedia page on it. It's it's called ovatestes. These people, they come out looking like one sex, and when they hit puberty, they start developing as the other sex. And some of these individuals have been sent to like sexual conversion camp, being told that there's something demonic, there's something wrong with you. You have a vagina, or that's what we see, but you're not menstruating. You're having all these other problems, and it's really causing some of these groups distress. And so if we're not determined, if we have one strict definition and we apply it in all categories, I don't think we can do that. I think what we're not, to get back to your question about, is it psychology? Part of it, I think it is psychology. And this is what Dr. Stephen Novella had brought up during his talk at SciCon, is that there could be a neuropathway in the brain that is causing there to be a disconnect between how the biology is flowing into how if you really do feel like you're female. The same way with your sexual preference. You are hardwired to think what you find attractive. And we're not really sure right now how that develops in a human being. Like, did you wake up suddenly one day and have to try to figure out if you were attracted to men or women? I never had to question or ask that for myself. It's like, it's hardwired into my physiology what I find attractive. I think it also slightly might be hardwired in my physiology of how feminine I like to express myself. I don't like wearing makeup. I don't like doing some of the other things.
Well, wait, but if you don't like wearing makeup, how could you be a woman?
Well, and that's the question. But is it because I have breasts that allow me to be female? Is it because the waist to hip ratio I have allows me to be female? There's women that I know that don't have a waist to hip ratio. They're just they're not conventionally considered attractive. So I think we have to have multiple definitions for this. And I'm kind of one of those people that sort of sides on that sex is kind of a binary thing. Like, I don't think there should be you're either male or female. Whichever side you're on, I don't know and I don't care. But I don't think that there's generally,
Pick one.
I think it's going to have to, we have to pick one, but you need to pick one based upon whatever your specific definition is of what makes you female. If you think that you're female, even though that you have all the reproductive parts of a man, but you're hardwired to say, no, I feel much more comfortable if I was allowed to alter my body in such a way that makes me feel like my brain and my body are connected, then you're female. But your doctor may have in your chart that you're biologically born a male, and that could be because you might still have a functioning prostate. You might still have other things that they need to determine. Do we need to do prostate exams on you when you're 50, even though even though you are a female identifying wise on your, like, there may be trans men that still have to get pap smears and have to get mammograms because they are at risk of certain conditions. And I think this is what people don't like. They don't like the term of, are you a like pregnant a person that can get pregnant? It's like a menstruating individual. I've heard people talking about like chest feeding. If there's trans men that try to breastfeed, but men have breasts too. I mean, you have nipples, just like we have nipples. Ours just have the biological function. And I think that's what's making people uncomfortable, is that the definition of what a man and a woman isn't strict. Like, there's no strict guidelines, and people aren't liking that, really.
Well, I can understand that there are people that don't fit neatly into one side or the other. I do feel like that for most purposes, or I guess I'd like to be able to say, if somebody fits clearly biologically into the woman, they have a uterus, they can reproduce, have babies, okay, or clearly a male where you can have sperm and you can get somebody pregnant, then they should be on that one side or the other. And you shouldn't say, well, yeah, but I know I'm physically a male, but I really like to put on lipstick and dress up in nice things. Well, I find that we should just say, well, it's fine to be a male, okay? That we shouldn't insult somebody and say, well, you're a sissy, I don't like you. No, okay, you're a feminine female, okay, a feminine male. That's okay. And if you're a masculine woman, okay, that's okay. And we all, can accept you for what you are.
But what if that person decides to have, or even if they don't decide to, what if they want to take hormones so that they can grow facial hair and have more masculine secondary sexual characteristics?
That's okay with me. Okay.
But would you
don't like to say that I am really a male just because I have now done various things to make myself a male, but still essentially my biology is something else.
But for me,
I'll jump in.
Yeah, but
I'll jump in here.
Yeah, go ahead, Ramiro.
Sorry. So I think so. I try to avoid, in the talk, I try to avoid trans issues.
I don't think the G word even appeared in your presentation, if memory serves.
Actually, when I saw the title of the talk, I thought that was what it was going to be about, to tell you the truth. But I was a little surprised. But
so I think the debate about trans, I think the problem, in my opinion, is that it's not just a debate about science. It's a debate about society and about law and culture, philosophy, and all of that.
Policy.
So policy, yeah. So we're not going to solve it. There's no experiment, that we can do that. This is how things should be done, because everyone's going to have a different opinion. Everyone's going to feel that the world should work in a different way. So I was just trying to mostly focus on the science, because even though Bob, you might think like, oh, this is not controversial. It has become controversial, and I think that you're right, Bob, that it has become controversial because of the trans issue. And in my opinion, I think that the people that like, not everyone, but some people that feel uncomfortable about accepting trans men as men and trans female as female. I think they feel that if they like give 1 inch on this definition of biological sex, that that crumbles the whole edifice, and then ever is going to be chaos all around. And I think that that's what has made this topic, this about biological sex, controversial. I mean, I had discussions online with people that lasted days. Some people even call me like, "Oh, if you don't believe in two sexes, like you're acting like a creationist. You're being a creationist." Uh, and yeah, other stuff that they
You're
said.
not you're not willing to change the definition.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean the transgender stuff, like I think it's interesting. We're gonna debate it. I don't know much about transgender stuff, to be honest, like the studies and all of that. So I think personally I would like to read a lot more about the science that has been going on there to give a more educated response like that. But also, it's not just science. It also involves uh, yeah, like policies. Like for example, like this whole debate about women in or men in women's sports. Trans women in women's sports. I think, in my opinion, again, like that's a societal decision, and science can inform it, but science is not going to give us the answer one way or another. And probably my opinion, if you want, I don't know if anyone wants my opinion, but yeah, my opinion, and is probably depends, right? Like in some cases, like in some circumstances, it probably makes sense to divide the categories based on like how strong the females are and how strong the males are.
Or just
But
even on
probably,
physiology. We talked about that with gymnastics.
yeah, exactly. But in other
Gymnastics,
categories,
women have the advantage, right? I mean,
No,
that's
not no, not no, no. No, what we were talking about with gymnastics is the pommel horse.
Yeah.
Women can't do the pommel horse because of our hips. It
yeah,
physically is impossible for a woman
Oh,
to be able to put their hand on the pommel horse and swing themselves around to be
okay.
able to do
Oh.
that. That's why we
Or
also don't do the parallel bars. That's why
hmm.
we have
Or the
uneven. It's because
rings.
of our hip diameter or the rings. And because that showcases the differences in male physiology on upper body strength, but also
Yeah.
what they can do. Whereas you guys they don't pair the uneven bars actually I think are a bit more difficult for men to do
Hmm.
because of just the way
Yeah.
it's set up. So that's why there's two different things.
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah,
I
well, to
think,
me, it seems to me the entire idea of women's sports, you could just say, oh, okay, we're just going to have sports and anybody can participate. And if, we don't care if you're a woman, if you're good enough to be a pro linebacker, okay, fine. But then it turned out no women are good enough to be a pro linebacker because women biologically tend to be smaller and weaker. And when you're going, in a
It's
professional
not
thing
that
where
we're
you
it's
you
not that
really
we're
have to be in the high end of the
it's not that we're
of the
weaker. It's
yeah,
where men tend to have higher muscle mass than we
yeah.
do.
Yeah.
So you're actually going to be able to outperform us in activities that cause
Yeah.
extra short spurts of bursts, where
Yeah.
we
So if somebody
dominate the
says,
shit out. No, and this is where we dominate the shit out of men is long running endurance
Yeah.
events past the marathon. We
"Oh,
kick your ass because we can sustain pain over 100 miles duration. Courtney
okay, cool.
Dauwalter is my freaking hero. You guys may have the marathon time, but we can kick your ass when it has to go for days and days and days.
Uh, okay. Well, I mean, I'm just thinking, you have sports, and if you just had one category, then it turns out, at least in some sports, or majority of sports, the men will have big advantage, as you say, in some situations, the women. But if you say, okay, we're going to divide it into men and women, then we get twice as many categories, twice as many people can be competitive, although in some sense it's
No,
still very unfair because just little weak people, uncoordinated, can't win anything. So
Well, we
so
have,
it's
they
so
also have,
we're
hey,
still talking about a 2% elite that's going to be doing all this
right.
stuff.
Hey, I ran the Chicago
Yeah.
Marathon this year, and the women's world record was set in the marathon. I was in the 5K part of that race when she finished.
Yeah.
I just wanted to let, and I didn't care. But there's
Yeah.
I beat some men on the course too. But
Yeah.
in some of those races, like in the elites, I think it's a good argument to probably have of who gets to compete. You know, when you're actually, you know, testing the limits of human endurance. But for somebody who's a back of a packer like me, if you want to register as non-binary and they do have a category for that, go for it. I'm not going to be butthurt if a trans woman kicks my ass training and like running a marathon.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be butthurt.
John, we haven't heard a lot from you. What's on your mind?
If you're divided into two categories, if you have a binary category, cool, you know, but if you're divided into two categories, the category should be determined by your biology because that's what's going to determine your strength, not by your psychology,
What's
which
definition?
is, oh, I like to play with dolls and I like to.
But what's the definition of the biology?
What?
But Bob, what's the definition of the biology? Is it the chromosomes the person was born with?
Well, there we go back.
Because we know, hold on, when people take hormone replacement therapy, it does cause physiological changes. It causes, if a man starts taking estrogen, it's going to cause more body fat and lower their muscle mass.
Yeah.
Vice versa for the other. So, and science needs to do more studies on that to tell us so that we can determine for these events if we need to change it. We're not going to get it perfect.
Yeah.
We at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you are biologically in between, okay, then I don't have a neat way that's going to fix that, you know. But if you're not, I mean, if you're clearly a biological woman and, you know, and you want to compete, no, of course, they never want to compete as men usually because they'll be probably doing worse. Whereas, of course, the biological men, I mean, you have the one swimmer who apparently just blows away all the women's swimming records and because she sort of is biologically male, and that seems like it kind of wrecks the whole concept of having, you know, two categories of competition. So, you know, so that would be my, you know, I'm happy. People want to live their life. You know, a male wants to live his life as a female because that's, you know, what he you know, the kind of activities and social life that he enjoys. Well, you know, that's fine with me. And I don't mind you know, them in women's restrooms either, because I have the feeling this should not create an actual problem. It's not like a trans woman is going to go in there and start raping people. I mean,
there are already adequate legal protections against people doing creepy things in bathrooms, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, so
We'll let John go.
Yeah.
No, I just a question for Ramiro and anybody else in the group who wants to answer. You guys actually, I had the question before the conversation. You kind of answered for me the first part of it, but I was curious, like in your opinion, in the current debate amongst the skeptic community, do you feel like there's a conflation between gender and you know, genes and gene expression? And also, how much do you think bias of like one's own worldview is coming into like seeping into their definition of science? I'm really curious about like your thoughts of that, especially I didn't see the presentation. I'm curious about your thoughts of anything, not just necessarily the presentation. And final question, I know I'm asking a lot. If you need me to repeat, I will. How much are we just playing like Wittgensteinian word games where we're just having like a philosophical misunderstanding because we're using words in like the same word but referring to two different things, and kind of we're talking about multiple topics when we think we're talking about one topic, but we're actually talking about two separate things. Just curious about your opinion of that, and
yeah,
if you need me to clarify, let me know.
No, that's a great question. Yeah, so I think that it you put it well, is probably a lot of this debate is about words, right? And so semantics, right? But and so one way of looking at it is it's just semantics. It's just not important at all. Another way of looking at it, I think, is at the beginning of the presentation, I put a slide about just science in general and how just changing our mental models about things and maybe changing the words that we use. And specifically, the example was about mathematics, where if we change or models, like the vectors were invented that led to better developments. So I think this is more about scientists, and how scientists talk about sex versus how the general public should talk about sex. The debate thing that has been going on is whether scientists should say that sex is strictly binary or whether sex is not strictly binary. So I think that in my opinion, like it depends on what type of science you're doing, whether you should use one or the other. But you shouldn't, if somebody doesn't want to use that model and for their particular field, that model works better. Like there shouldn't be like a restriction on using the words like differently in different fields. Like that happens all the time, right? And I think that not recognizing that is also one of the issues, with the debate, is because different, like the same word can mean different things in different fields. Like for example, in chemistry, a metal is this specific section of the periodic table. These are what the metals are. In astronomy, a metal is anything that's not hydrogen. So it is the same word, but different fields, different contexts. And so similarly, I think that some fields where they're more looking at the development of the person or the organism, like saying that sex has to be strictly binary. I think that's the gist of it, is the strictness of it, because there's definitely like I think Bob mentioned, there's individuals that they're fully male, like everything about them is male, so they're unambiguously male. So I think, and then there's females. I think that the problem is like with these edge cases, and so I think with in my opinion, like one side that is for the strict sex binary, they want to categorize these individuals as male or female, and only based on the gametes that they produce, and that's the only thing that they look in the body of that particular person. So yeah, that thing, and so you asked the question about biases, and I think I mean, in my opinion, again, like the bias that I see there, and the people that I talk to that are against this, like the different definitions of what sex is, I feel like they're really uncomfortable, with trans issues. So I think they see, I've heard this discussion that the academies and the institutions are starting to become woke. This is the word that they use. They're starting to become woke, and the evidence that they're becoming woke is that scientists are starting to say that sex is not strictly binary. So my feeling, is that the reason that they're saying that is more, it has to do more with the fact that that they don't like, the what's going on with the trans debate, and so they think that I think probably some people, it depends on the person, right? But I think some people think that really this is, the biologists are fooling themselves and they're doing pseudoscience when they, if they just have different definitions of sex for different fields.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you for your answer. definitely, I've seen people talking about this online, but I haven't like dove into it yet. So I was just curious of your opinion on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody when the videos from SciCon get posted on YouTube, which who knows how long that's going to take. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's weeks, sometimes it's months, to check out both Stephen Novella's talk, which is on its face not necessarily obviously about sex or gender. The title of his talk was When Skeptics Disagree.
Oh,
So check out that one. And then the other talk to check out from SciCon 2024 is from Jerry Coyne. And I think that one, I think the topic of that one might have been just biological sex or
It
something.
was the ideological something about, so I think Jerry Coyne is I think his premise, like what he's stating, is very clearly that that wokeism is sort of infecting science and academia, and that science is going to become eventually, like, it's going to be really difficult to do science because of this. And as one example, I think he gives this example of sex, but he has like 5 examples that he gives. One is sex, one is race,
Yes.
one is about women, whether women and males are different, and then another one is the Maori, like some stuff that's going on in New Zealand that I don't know anything about. Yeah, so I think that, I think you spoke about, John, about biases. So I think, in my opinion, like, people have this fear of stuff becoming woke, and I think that that's the bias that the lens that they're seeing things through. So I feel like they're seeing things that are not really there and attributing them to wokeness. And so I'm trying to see it. I mean, I'm obviously, you can probably tell that the other opinion,
mhm.
but yeah. So I'm trying to uh, talk about this this issue. It's
So
difficult because
it,
it's
it sounds like
controversial.
you're saying that the other side, out of a fear of science becoming dogmatic, they may be becoming dogmatic themselves.
So
That's
there,
my opinion. Yeah.
Mm.
and I'd like to also interject too, Ramiro, that I think some of it is, some of us have been seeing a little bit of this since the election has happened. Um, that there have been some people that are now coming out and saying some things that are really devastating people in the community. They didn't realize where some of their, like one of our friends, I'll bring up Peter Boghossian. He posted something that was very pro-Trump that devastated one of our friends about just like, how can you go? Because her whole mindset was like, I thought you were very scientific, I thought you were very skeptical, and now you're coming out and saying this about this person, and it's causing me now to question whether you are being anti-intellectual, because that's the big thing that's happening right now, right? A lot of people are being fed misinformation. Part of what happened with this whole presidential election and what's still continuing to occur is that there's lots of misinformation and people are now like, I've been seeing it on the internet that when Dr. Oz got nominated for the to be the head of Medicaid and Medicare, there were people, literally, I could just see the light bulbs flashing in the person's comments, like, you put a charlatan, you're going to put a charlatan with no experience who basically encouraged people to get pseudoscientific medications in charge of a huge governmental program that regulates the payment for medical care. And it's like, you're kind of seeing this now. So I think we are starting to see kind of the mask slip on some of these people, where sometimes it may be that they really are coming from a racist place or wanting to continue upholding, like, kind of just white supremacy in a way. And it's very disheartening to see that maybe that I was right about this person, that the reason you're being so anti-scientific or not wanting to look at what science really does say about biological sex is really coming from a place of you're just not comfortable with people being different and you're masking it as, well, I'm just too woke, when but this is what the science says. And so I think we're gonna continue to kind of find that in the coming months. That, like, Lawrence Krauss has said some pretty disheartening things recently, and he's a great physicist. But we know that there are intelligent people that say that do good scientific work. But then we come to find out that there's other areas of their life that's problematic, and they're starting to disregard science and other things because it conflicts with their ideological worldview. And that's one thing we talked about at CiteCon was, is this coming from a place of ideology? Is this because because I know I have to think about that all the time. I'm very supportive of trans people, of, you can use your pronouns, all that stuff. It doesn't bother me. But when Ramiro and I were talking about this, I had to kind of think, is my opinion about this coming from that vein, that I want everything to fit into a nice, neat little box? And what I came to the conclusion of is that there's multiple definitions, and we're also are talking past ourselves sometimes. Like, I may be conflating gender, which I think Bob kind of does that a little bit, where you're looking at gender expression, how a person chooses to dress, when what we're talking about is, should this person actually be classified as male or female in their medical records, because it may affect the medical treatment they get. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately I've concluded, I really don't care what your chromosomes say. I really don't care what gender or if I choose to identify as male or female. Are we going to have a relationship where that actually matters, where our genitalia are going to come in contact with each other? And if the answer to that question is no, I really don't care what you choose to identify with.
That feels like a really good place to leave it, Faith. Thank you very much. We're just slightly over time, and we started just slightly after time. So, no, this is perfect.
Yeah.
This has been really, really invigorating. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And I am glad that everybody was here. I know that people who weren't able to make it are going to enjoy watching the playback of this one when I do get it posted on YouTube. So watch for that. I just want to leave everybody with a little retread of my intro administrivia items, which is Skeptic Camp is going to happen at toward the tail end of May. So everybody encouraged to get involved there. And also next week we have Culture Club. We're talking about the Timothy Caulfield series, A User's Guide to Cheating Death. Those of us who were at CiteCon got to see Timothy speak, and he's a riveting presenter, and I can't wait to finish watching this show. So see you all next week for that. But last and foremost, Ramiro, thank you very much for a very engaging, thought-provoking talk. And thanks to everybody else for being a big part of it. And we'll see you all next week.
Thank you. See you later.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yay.
Or Indigenous Peoples Day, whatever it is. If you're not celebrating with people.
Happy fall holiday of your choice.
Happy whatever the hell you need to do next week to stay sane.
That's right. Take care, y'all.
Thank you. Take care.
I need to eat turkey.